Seattle is a majority renter city, as I think you all know, and renters must be prioritized in this budget.
We must keep doors open on our current shelter and housing programs to ensure people have safe places to go.
I'm here to ask council members to help us ensure continuance of services for victims of sexual assault.
You are hearing some of the public comments that are flowing into the Seattle City Council right now from the first public hearing on the budget, which happened this week as the council gets feedback on the mayor's $8.9 billion proposal. What are people calling for? What sort of budget concerns are on the horizon? And what impact is a federal shutdown having on Seattle? Plus, some new insights on the Seattle mayor's race and the federal agency ICE making some inroads into Seattle you might not even be aware of. All this and more considered this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. The views expressed here are mine. I'm a host on the Seattle channel. Great to be with you once again. And I'm with my friend and co-host, David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, I guess I got to say it. Of course, the Mariners, of all teams, found a way to bring a rain delay with them as they visit Detroit in the AL Divisional Series. How fitting was that?
Yeah, I know. Although I'll have to be honest, which is the timing is much better for me because it was a middle of the workday game, and now looking like it's going to be after a workday. So
I'll take it.
It's probably annoying for a lot of people, but kind of works better for my schedule, honestly.
Have you ever thought about David's schedule? Kind of the most important part of this, isn't it? David, thank you as always, and thank you everyone, including our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to the patrons of the show. Mike jumped on board as a $5 a month supporter last week. I'm going to be sending a Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal his way. You also got to hear a Patrons First podcast this week with Rachel Smith, formerly of the Seattle Metro Chamber. Some pretty good stuff there. Check it out. Be a patron, and you can learn a lot more about it. It's on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Also, thanks for watching this podcast on Converge Media, the video version on Converge, Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get to it. Time for Right Here, Right Now. Let the budget hearings commence. The very first budget hearing in the Seattle City Council's nearly 2-month process happened on Tuesday of this week with an afternoon session featuring some call-in public testimony, another in-person session in the evening. The council's breaking it up in some different ways right now. And David, what struck me about the early part of this session, at least, is that there are so many issues that voters are passionate about. I counted 5 supporters of more money for trees and a better program there, about the same amount for people looking for more support for treatment programs, criminal diversion programs like LEAD. But then you got your folks concerned about Office of Labor Standards funding, immigrant and refugee affairs. It's a little dizzying, I know. How do you think public testimony is going to shape the budget? Is it going to move the needle on what could be a very tight budget season here?
I think most of the council people probably have a sense of what their priorities are already, and I doubt that those fundamentally will change all that much. At the same time, this council has shown if the issue is in their wheelhouse, and I think trees is probably one of those where if they get enough feedback, you do see some movement. And so I think it could, and I don't think they hold these public hearings purely for symbolism. I do think some of the comments do actually make their way in. But at the same time, there's no extra money to spend at this point. So if anybody in the council wants to fund something at a different level, they have to take that money from somewhere else. And that end up being the whole math equation here. Yeah, I mean, I would expect that at the end of the day, it'll be this sort of, $500,000 here, $1 million here, that sort of thing. Though fundamentally, I expect that the actual budget isn't going to look that much different than what is proposed by the mayor here.
Yeah, I would imagine the same. And I do want to follow up on another story we talked about last week. You actually wrote an article about CARE, Community Assisted Response and Engagement. That's the department that handles 911 calls, also sends out teams of social workers to help with person down calls, for example, that don't need an armed officer. It sounds like CARE's chief, Amy Barden, is getting frustrated with what she sees as a pattern of subversion by street-level officers. They seem to be rejecting or ignoring assistance from these civilian responders. What's going on here, and what budget implications are there to this story?
Yeah, the CARE saga itself is just very kind of complicated and weedy, and I think frustrating for a lot of people because if you can point to anything that came out of 2020 and all those protests, it's kind of this. This is the thing that's supposed to provide a response for those moments you experience when you're downtown or wherever and you come across somebody who clearly needs help, but you don't really want to call the cops on them. This is supposed to be that. But the problem is it's been caught up in these super thorny fights and negotiations with the Seattle Police Officers Guild because, one of the selling points is a lot of officers don't like to do that sort of work. And so the win-win pitch of the care department is, it provides a more kind of muted and perhaps less dangerous response while at the same time freeing up cops to do something that is more suited to police officers. But the union and Mike Solon, its president in particular, has never let an opportunity pass by to negotiate something. And that's frustrating to people, but he is the head of a union. That is what unions do.
Yep.
And so, at the end of the day, the care work is a body of work argument because it would be taking away calls from Seattle police officers. That's kind of the whole point. And so the union is using that to negotiate with the city over it. And because there is no agreement right now, the whole care department is required to respond alongside officers. And so what Amy Barton is saying is that system, which she already thinks is flawed, is being made even more flawed because the officers are really not playing ball, that they are taking steps to cancel care calls, to they'll get to a scene and just close it out without waiting for care. And it kind of defeats the whole point of having care around, which is these people are trained in a way that officers are not, and to find some kind of more lasting solution for these people who might be in some kind of intense crisis, whereas the officers are there really to just solve the scene itself, not necessarily the things that individual might need. And so if officers aren't playing ball, which Amy Barton is saying in pretty blunt terms that they're not, the functionality of care is really undermined.
Yeah, and I just think about this because there's this temporary agreement between Seattle, the police union. It's supposed to run out at the end of this year with regard to care. And then I think about the budget process that's going on at the same time, too, because there's this 0.1% sales tax increase that was allotted by the state government for city governments like Seattle to use. They're saying we want to put a lot of that into care. Help me out with these kind of big decisions at the end of the year, because I would think that the city would want to invest that money. It sounds like they do into care, but at the same time, if they don't have an assurance of that agreement, then it's tough to make that investment. Help me out with that thought if you can.
Yeah, because the proposed investment would double the number of care responders from 24 to 48, but the agreement says you can't have more than 24. And so Amy Barton says, if we get that money, we'll have something to do with it. We have a lot of work, administrative, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, what you want from care is people out on the streets doing care work. And until they get an agreement, they can't do that at a greater level than they are now. And so then it does raise the question of what is that money actually funding? Is it funding what we want it to? I will say that I think it's quite likely that there is going to be an agreement soon, or at least I guess I'll say I think it's quite likely there will be a tentative agreement soon, as in I think from what I hear just from people talking off the record, because it's really sensitive stuff. We're talking about labor negotiations. My sense is they think they're close and might even have a tentative agreement soon. We don't know exactly, but then for me, it's the question of, can the union sell that tentative agreement to its members? I mean, there does seem to be some kind of conflict here. So I think they will get an agreement soon-ish. It's just whether or not it can get ratified by the union. I think it's probably going to cost money. I mean, again, frankly, if the union negotiators for the police are worth their paychecks, they're probably going to try and push for higher pay for officers in exchange for some of these changes. So it might cost them money. But I do think the proposal is some kind of expression of confidence that an agreement can and will be reached before the end of the year. And certainly Mayor Harrell hopes before the election.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's another piece of this here. The election hangs over so many parts of this budget. And I did want to talk about another potential City of Seattle budget issue. We're just about a week into a federal government shutdown here. KUOW reported that Seattle and King County governments are standing by with food vouchers if recipients in the WIC program, commonly known as food stamps, start to run out of benefits. And I'm just thinking about it, David, because from all the reports I'm seeing, this could be a long federal shutdown we're talking about here. How would a shutdown like that affect a local government like the city of Seattle, maybe the budget process here? Because there's a lot of federal funding that goes into the city budget, too.
Yeah, the biggest federal pass-through, it's a little hard to track because, it almost is, laundering is the wrong word, but it almost feels that way, which is the federal money. A lot of it goes into the state, which then goes to the city. And so you kind of have to track that pipeline. Is that going to get hung up? As far as what goes directly to the city, transportation funds are a big one. Do some of the paychecks on some federally backed projects start drying up. What does that mean for construction? And then, yeah, services like that, food access or healthcare programs certainly are at risk. And then, but then, yeah, it would be hard for me to sort of draw a map of how much money coming from the state is sort of originally coming from the federal government. But it certainly, you could imagine that this will cause some backups in the piping, so to speak.
Yeah, and I thought the other side of this, the fact that our state actually has nearly 80,000 federal workers employed here. Gene Balk at the Times, one of your colleagues, reporting this. There are about 18,000 in King County alone. You've got exempt workers like postal workers still getting paid, but that's not the case for all the federal government jobs. And when you have President Trump threatening that these employees might not get back pay after the shutdown's over, I just feel like this could impact a lot of spending power locally here, too, when you talk about the shutdown.
And, you know, the city forecasters, their economic forecasts are going to come out with another recommendation in October. And they were already kind of leaning toward the pessimistic, because, you know, whenever these forecasters come up with estimates, they have three scenarios, the rosy one, the baseline one, and the pessimistic one. And last time they chose the middle of the road one, but if they're getting some indication that people are going to react to this shutdown in some way and not spend as much, whatever it might be, maybe they're more likely, even just a little bit, to go with the pessimistic forecast, in which case that's a lot less money for the city to spend, and then the city council people are going to have to find cuts. So certainly I think that's probably a risk facing City Hall right now.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, coming up, what else do we have to learn about the two mayoral candidates in Seattle, Katie Wilson and the incumbent Bruce Harrell, and how will that affect voters in November? We're going to take a closer look at these questions coming up next on Now Hear This. A slew of debates continues to dominate the airwaves here in the Seattle mayor's race. David and I have both now moderated a debate in the past couple of weeks here. If you didn't catch the action with David last week on King 5, guess what? Katie Wilson and Bruce Harrell are definitely still fighting with each other.
She said, for example, I had lowered funding in LEAD, which is a law enforcement diversion program. Absolutely untrue, a flat-out lie.
Our current mayor's face was all over mailers that went out this February, supporting an alternative to the measure that would have funded the social housing developer, an alternative that did not provide a new funding source, that took money away from other affordable housing, essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul.
David, I got to say, nice work on this event. And folks, if you want to see David Croman in a coat and tie, a rare and beautiful occurrence, look at the replay on YouTube. Great stuff. David, what was that like? What stood out to you during that debate?
It was kind of what I expected. I mean, we tried to give them a lot of chances to go back and forth and respond to each other, and I think that they did that, to your point. I think they understand what's going on here and are going after each other pretty hard as a result. I would say particularly Harrell, probably because he is, you know, kind of the underdog at this point.
9.5 point underdog, yeah.
After the August primary, and so he's going after her pretty hard, and I think Katie Wilson is kind of trying to, my takeaway from this debate is sort of trying to put her head down and feel confident that her message is the right one and kind of move forward, and nevertheless had a good amount of back and forth with, you know, it kind of boils down to Katie Wilson saying, Mayor Harrell, you've been around forever and you don't have a great vision for the city, and Mayor Harrell saying, Katie Wilson, you don't have a plan for what all these, you know, things that you're saying you want to do. You know, they're doing a lot of these debates, so we're hearing
ton of them,
some repetition for sure, but maybe I'm misremembering, but this feels about as lively of a mayoral competition as I can remember.
Yeah, I was going to say just the sheer number of debates is a whole lot more. I'm actually moderating another one in West Seattle coming up on Thursday of this week. If you're around and want to check out what's going on with the West Seattle Chamber of Commerce, folks, make sure you do it. David, I also wanted to touch on this. You wrote a piece about Katie Wilson that really went into her background, which I wasn't fully aware of. She left college, Oxford University in England, just 6 weeks before she would have graduated. As you described it, kind of a tug of war between education and activism, where the activism won out. And I wanted to talk about that story because clearly the Harrell campaign jumped on this immediately. Harrell saying, hey, she dropped out of college. I was the first to go to college in my family and so proud of it. But what did you learn about Katie Wilson? What do you think voters are learning about her right now?
Yeah, I saw Harold's announcement today and saying something about, you know, today we learned, but that's not right at all. He's been talking about her education for a while. I think he even brought it up in the debate last Friday before we even published our story. So he did not learn that from the Seattle Times. But certainly he seems to think that is a point in his favor. Whereas, you know, I think other people see this as evidence, and this is how Katie Wilson describes it. And, you know, I talked to people who have known her most of her life and how they would describe it, which is a commitment to the sort of work that she has always wanted to do. I think you can disagree with a lot of her proposals or whatever her policy. But my takeaway is that Katie Wilson has always been very ideologically minded, very aware of what she sees as right and wrong. I think this life of activism started from a very young age. I can't even remember. It's a long enough story. I can't remember if I put this in there, but I think she met her now husband at a protest against elephants in the circus when they were in high school. And so I think her decision to leave Oxford, Harrell is trying to paint that as quitting. And she was very forthright about the fact that her parents were upset by that decision at the time. But it also just really showed her full commitment to the kind of life that she has led. And you can say what you want about the decision, but now she is the front runner to be the Seattle mayor. Yeah. And so it's hard to say that decision was the wrong one for her, because here she is now. Yeah. I think I led with that in the piece because I do think it says a lot about her as a person, that she eschewed this kind of traditional path that a lot of people take that can lead to probably higher paying and more high profile jobs than what she had for much of her life. Yeah. But I do think it comes from a genuine place, which again is not just her words, it's the words of the people who've known her, a genuine place of, this is the life I want to lead and I have to commit myself fully to that.
Yeah. I also wanted to make sure I gave some time to this. There was some hubbub online about a comment Bruce Harrell made at a recent debate regarding a criminal repeat offender. The mayor's line was, when this person is committing 6 or 7 crimes, I don't know his or her story. Maybe they were abused as a child. Maybe they're hungry. But my remedy is to find their life story to see how we can help. Wasn't talking a lot putting about that person in jail. This really lit up the conservative news outlets for sure. Any thoughts about this? Is just a blip on the road? Does this comment hurt him in this race? How do you look at this, David?
No, this comment doesn't hurt him.
Okay. Okay.
This is Seattle, and he's losing to his left. He's not losing to his right. So I don't think the comment hurts him, and I think the comment in context is one that is widely agreed upon in the Seattle electorate. And you hear Lisa Dugard at LEAD make this argument a lot, which is, if you actually want to address public safety, you do have to take that approach, because we have seen lots of data of the 100, 200 plus people in Seattle and King County who are arrested way more than 6 or 7 times over and over and over. It's misdemeanor crime. And so you can't put these people away for life. Yeah. And so, you can't kind of fully depend. The argument is you can't kind of fully depend on arrests and release as being the thing that is going to solve their problem. And if the central argument of LEAD, which is very popular in Seattle, is if you want to actually improve public safety, you have to find the way for these people to not be arrested anymore. Yeah. And doing so requires kind of some of what the mayor is talking about, which is understanding where they're coming from and what it is that they need. Certainly, it is an easy thing to glom onto. And I saw Stephen Miller tweeting about it from President Trump, his kind of senior advisor. I also saw Jonathan Cho, the former Coma reporter, sort of trying to frame this as the end of Mayor Harrell's campaign. Oh, boy. Mayor Harrell may very well lose, but it's not going to be because of this. Okay, fair enough. I did want to talk about another federal issue, I guess, that's flared up in Seattle and other cities in the past few weeks here. ICE, the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement at the federal level, recruiting local police officers to join their ranks. The Associated Press wrote about this a couple days ago. The Trump administration spending millions to run TV ads in places like Seattle with messages, and I'm paraphrasing in part here, hey, officers, join ICE because in sanctuary cities, you're ordered to stand down while dangerous illegals walk free. Councilmember Kettle actually spoke out about this a few weeks ago from the Seattle City Council, said the ads were bad for Seattle's progress on hiring officers and public safety in general. But then you got ICE offering enticements like $50,000 in signing bonuses, maybe paying for education. The sell really looks like it's on here. What do you make of these ads, David? It's interesting. There are occasional culture and political clashes between the Seattle Police Department force and the city of Seattle. We saw this. There was, a Trump flag in one of the rooms. And, I think a lot of the folks who work for the Seattle Police Department come from, there's a lot of military background, certainly a much higher proportion of military people who then live in Seattle. And so there is just sort of baked in like a little bit of a demographic difference between who works for the Seattle Police Department and who works for Seattle. And I think it would be fair to call that group probably more conservative than the city as a whole. At the same time, the Seattle Police Department lost a lot of people around 2020 and now are hiring people. And if you were joining the Seattle Police Department at a time like this, you shouldn't have any kind of misunderstandings about the area you were coming to work in and the fact that you do work in a sanctuary city and a sanctuary state. And
right.
So it's not like anybody in the Seattle Police Department doesn't kind of know why they're there. And there have been plenty of other opportunities for them to leave. Lots of departments all across the state and the country have been offering similar signing bonuses. And so if you're still at the police department, you must have some reason to still be there. So, I wouldn't expect this necessarily to lead to a flood of exits or whatever it might be. But maybe a couple, and it is interesting that, they think that this is fertile recruiting ground. I don't know exactly what that says about the whole environment, but certainly interesting.
Well, and it just makes me think about the larger issue nationally, because Seattle is definitely not alone when it comes to hiring officers. And this was going back before the pandemic. We're talking about police departments around the country really having a tough time hiring officers. And when that whole idea of a $50,000 bonus is dangled out there, okay, maybe the Seattle Police Department isn't as affected by much, but you've got a lot of different local jurisdictions around here in terms of police departments where I think you might have people who would be tempted to do that for the dollars of it, at least.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think there was a lot of that. And in fact, there was some data that showed there were a number of people who left for a signing bonus, stayed the minimum number of years, and then came back for the signing bonus at their old place. So yes, it does entice movement. I guess just my point is that if you want to find a signing bonus, you can find a signing bonus.
Yeah.
It is not ice in a vacuum. Lots of police departments across the state have these signing bonuses.
Right.
I think that if you want to go to work for ICE, it's because you believe in that mission and want to do that work, which I don't think the existence of a recruitment video won't change that. If you believe in the mission of ICE, then you probably were already interested. And if you don't, you probably weren't. So, I think the existence of the recruitment video is probably more symbolically, creates a little more symbolic tension than what the actual consequences may be.
Fair. All right, well, coming up, a look at a victory for the state of Washington coming from the U.S. Supreme Court, the tale of the Climate Commitment Act coming up on What's Next. David, I wanted to highlight some news that came down just a few days ago as the U.S. Supreme Court gets its session underway on the first Monday in October. The court declined to hear a challenge to Washington's Climate Commitment Act, which requires polluters to pay for pollution allowances. This is the Cap and Invest Law of 2021, set up a carbon market in our state. I was just shocked by this, David, because we have a conservative majority U.S. Supreme Court. They didn't have a written justification for why they did this, but what did you make of this? I thought this was a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal. At the same time, I do think the Supreme Court turns down most of the cases that are petitioned there. They can only take so many. This court seems to be increasingly moving toward wanting to take big conservatives precedent-setting swings. And while certainly I would expect a court like this to strike down a kind of liberal priority like the Climate Commitment Act, I don't know what the kind of broader implications would be for the country or what that would mean to people outside of Washington state. Certainly it would hurt the prospect of future carbon markets, but there aren't that many of those. It's really California and, Canada, but of course that wouldn't matter.
Right.
So it doesn't surprise me, mostly for the pure kind of logistical piece of it, which is they only have so much bandwidth. Is this where we want to
spend our time? Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No. Do you see it in any way as a vindication, though, for our state's climate policies? They've been attacked with 3 initiatives since 2016, all of which have failed, including one last year. I just wanted to talk about what this means in terms of climate policy and its future here and possibly in other states. What does that mean from that perspective, do you think?
I don't think this decision serves as vindication necessarily because of what I said, which is I wouldn't doubt that this court would. I'm sure this court would love to find a way to strike it down. I think the real vindication came with the initiative, which is it was like I think the Climate Commitment Act is probably I don't know if I want to declare this, but it might be an enemy number one of a lot of kind of conservative and even moderate voices in Washington state who see it as basically a hidden gas tax, or maybe even not such a hidden gas tax, funding things that they don't agree with. So the fact, though, that a lot of those folks got really organized, got this initiative out there, and it failed, that was the real vindication for it. And I think we saw that in the last legislative session, that was a fairly left legislative session last year, and I think that was directly the result of that initiative as well as the capital gains repeal initiative failing pretty sizably. So despite some fairly vocal conservative voices speaking out against this, voters at least voters still seem to back it. And that I think was the real vindication here. And now they're kind of looking for other more legal avenues to strike it down, but that won't necessarily hurt its popularity.
No, it's definitely something our state voters have supported for sure. All right, well, Dave, we do need to wrap up. Back to the M's here. I can't believe it, man. You were at Game 2, the Mariners' first home playoff win in more than 20 years. What was that like, man?
Yeah, it was great. I went with my brother-in-law. It was sort of a last-minute impulse decision. We spent way too much on center field seats, and I think we were in the center field bleachers, like under the big screen.
Oh, like you can't even see the big screen. Perfect. Okay.
No. Yeah, we couldn't see the hydro races or anything. I think we were maybe 4 rows from the back. Like we were close to as nosebleed as you could get.
Awesome.
But it was great. It's great though because you can see the whole crowd. Mm-hmm. You can see it's a really good angle to see home runs from because you can see the ball going out.
Yeah.
So it was. I went to some playoff games in 2001 and 2000 when I was a kid, and I have great memories of that. And this is top 5, maybe top 3 best Seattle sports experiences I've ever had. It was because it was a great game. But also, the Seahawks had just slid out, so it was just as packed down there as I've ever seen it. But it wasn't like claustrophobic. Everyone was having a great time. All the vendors were just making an insane amount of money, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All the bars were packed. And then, to come out, and I took the ferry home, and even on the ferry, people were doing Mariners chants.
Awesome. That's cool.
It was just such a... I spent more than I was comfortable spending, and I have zero regrets whatsoever doing it. It was a truly one of the better sporting experiences I've ever had.
Yeah, and having 2 superstars come through like that, Cal Raleigh and Julio Rodriguez, was great. And then I do have another question from my list of questions that I'm always afraid to ask my wife. So Josh Naylor, just about to be on paternity leave, or maybe he did. I don't quite know what's going on right yet. It's one of these situations where I'm like, oh, man, if I was that baseball player in the playoffs, just had my first kid, like, what do you do in that situation? That's so tough because you want to help your team, but you've got your family. And I don't know. What did you make of that? How do you look at that situation?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as a Mariners fan, I have to say this, but I think Josh Naylor's, in a just world, he would just go and spend the week with his wife and kid. And, because, that's such a playoff. I'm over the moon with what the Mariners are doing right now. I'm wrapped up in it as anybody, but I have 2 young kids, and that's just baseball will happen again next year. I feel for the guy that he has to make that decision, and that there is a lot of pressure on him, I'm sure, to come back and play for the team, even a day or so after his wife gives birth to his kid. And I think ideally the Mariners win quick the today and tomorrow, and then they get a few days off, and she has the kid there. And then they go into the ALCS, and he can feel a little more comfortable.
Boy, I sure hope so. Yeah, I know it's one of those things. Baseball's a crazy sport like that. You do have to be there. You have to show up. We're looking for a good family moment there happening for the Naylor family and for the Mariners family too, for that matter. David, thank you as always for joining me. Thanks to everybody who is listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's happening in local politics. If you want to be a patron and support the show, go for it. Please pledge $5 per month or more to Patreon on Seattle News, Views, and Brews. You can do that there, and thank you very much for your help. You can hear this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen, we are there. Thanks for watching on Converge Media, too. See you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.